impi chiryanshita yakusaranga yakumana vaisa mukutube paikara chiryanshita yakusaranga yakwana vaisa
Friday, the 24th of July 2026, and welcome to our Friday's episode of Election Tips and Insights. My name is Kabanse, and in today's episode we are going to discuss election observation and monitoring. Election observation and monitoring. Why does it matter? Why is it important? Why does it matter? Of course, any serious political party or stakeholder in any election must never take the aspect of election monitoring exercise as business as usual, because it is a very key ingredient, a key element to ensure a credible and transparent election. Therefore, election monitoring or observing an election must not be left to chance. It's an activity that every well-meaning stakeholder, every serious political party must plan and invest in. To start with, let's understand what we mean when we say election observation and election monitoring. So, observation or being an observer, observation is simply a process of information gathering, or let's say on-site fact-finding, or making an informed judgment about the credibility, legitimacy, and transparency of any electoral process. So basically, observation is about information gathering. It's about fact-finding. It's about making an informed judgment about the credibility, legitimacy, and transparency of an electoral process. That is what we call election observation. So, as an observer or observers simply, their role is one, to see what is happening in an election, then they take note and they report back to their respective observer mission or observer group. So their role is basically just to observe and take notes and report back to their observer group. Okay? However, an observer may not or may inform the commission in writing of any discrepancies observed during the conduct of an election. They may not interfere with the electoral process there and then, or they may not interject with the proceedings of an electoral process. On the other hand, who is a monitor? Okay? Or what is election monitoring? What is election monitoring, or who is a monitor? So, election monitoring is basically a process of observing, underlying that, observing the conduct of an election and the behavior of different stakeholders during an election in order to determine the compliance with the relevant laws, regulations, and international standards for election. So you observe, okay? You observe the conduct of the election. You observe how the different players, the different stakeholders in the electoral process are behaving. Are they complying with the laws, or are they not complying with the laws? So, a monitor, the difference, and one of the key differences between a monitor and observer is that an election monitor, okay, an election monitor may bring to the attention of the presiding officer or any member of the commission any discrepancies that may arise during the conduct of an election. So meaning, if you are a monitor, you can interfere. let me use the word interfere loosely. Okay, you can interject, you can actively participate and raise an issue when the election is ongoing, whereby if you are an observer, you can just sit back and wait to report the findings, because you're just observing, taking notes, and then you report back to your superiors or to your bosses. Okay? Therefore, a monitor sees what is happening during an election, they take note, and they may intervene on the spot. So if you're a monitor, when you see something is not adding up, something is wrong, you have the right to intervene immediately and say, seek clarification or seek guidance on any issue that may not be handled correctly during the electoral process. So election agents and polling agents are recruited to monitor elections on behalf of the candidate or on behalf of the political party. And it is for that reason that they may intervene when they observe or notice any discrepancies during the electoral process. So, what is the importance of election monitoring by political parties? Why should political parties invest in election monitoring? Number one, it safeguards the interest of the party. The famous voter protection. No, we are doing voter protection. If now we could protect my vote, the best and legal way to do that is by ensuring and making sure that you have monitors present so that they can safeguard the party interests and they can observe the election and they can clarify or take action when any issue does not seem to be going according to the standards of the election process. Secondly, monitoring is important because it helps to ensure a free and fair election. When you have more stakeholders who are part of the process and they are part of the entire process from the beginning of the voting to the closing of the vote, then that makes sure that there is no backdoor methods. No one is doing anything illegal that might jeopardize the electoral process. So it makes sure that we have a free and fair election. The third point to remember why monitoring is important, why political parties should invest in election monitoring, is that it reduces human error and mistakes. Because you know that there are people watching. When you want to veni chitapano, so you are going to pay particular attention to everything that you are doing. So the election stakeholders that we spoke about in our last episode, everyone who is involved in the electoral process is going to pay particular attention, knowing that there's a group of people or there are individuals that are paying attention and watching everything they are doing. Another aspect why election monitoring is important is that it prevents fraud, irregularities, or intimidation. When there are monitors, when there's a group of monitors, no one is going to engage in fraud because they know that there are extra 30 eyes that are looking and paying attention to everything that's happening during the election process. Therefore, people are going to pay attention, they're going to take precautions and make sure that they do things to the letter in line with the election or electoral laws. The other thing why monitoring is important is that it builds confidence in the electoral process and in the results, because every stakeholder was represented and they were part of the process. Therefore, it promotes transparency, openness in the electoral processes. And finally, when you have election monitors present, it promotes peace or peaceful conflict resolution, because they are going to raise issues based on the facts, based on things that they have seen, not something they've heard from a third party. Therefore, even when it comes to resolving disputes that may happen at a polling station or any election facility, it is easier because everyone is present and they are speaking from an informed perspective. So as a boy Rajabe from Norway, tambela kuti kuno balete ma ballot paper yari kudara printed, bwanji uko no. They are going to be there and they are going to speak from an informed perspective. Therefore, it makes conflict resolution very, 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 very easy. Okay? So, what should you do if you're a political party to make sure that you have monitors present during the election or during the electoral process? The key thing is what we spoke about in the last episode, accreditation. Make sure that your monitors, those that you trust to keep an extra eye for you in the electoral process, have been duly accredited to be election monitors. And like we said, make sure that you submit the list, the names of the people that will represent your party, that will represent you as a candidate, to the Election Commission of Zambia for processing at least 4 days before the day of the polls. Make sure that those people are known. They have to submit their full names, their NRC numbers, their residential addresses, okay? And they are supposed to fill in, or they are supposed to be issued a form that we call the oath or affirmation form, which is a Gen 1 form in the electoral process, the Gen 1 form. So an example is the form that I'm about to share. I'm sharing just about now on the screen. That is called the oath or affirmation form that every monitor or every observer is supposed to be issued for them to be considered legally and correctly processed to be a monitor. Therefore, Any serious political party or candidate must commence the identification and training of their election monitors to make sure that they are ready and they understand what is expected of them once they walk into that polling station. So, if you have not yet started the process of identifying your monitors for this year's election, please do so immediately, because time is not with you, and it's important that you have your monitors ready and geared for them to be able to provide an extra eye for you during the election process. So any serious political party, any serious candidate must invest and make sure that they have these monitors ready for election day. That's all for today. My name is Kabanse, and we speak to you again in the next episode, which will be a very, very interesting episode. Next week, we are going to talk about preparing for voting day. What are the things you need to prepare or look out for as you prepare for the actual voting day? So be ready for the next session. For now, let's prepare our monitors so that they are geared for election day. Till next time, have a good one.
Kwatitebo basakala nyongo ngabayiringanya kwatitebo bapompwe